Okay, let's get started. The agenda was plus some additional documentations that Mr. Beebe worked on. Last emailed out on Friday night, I believe, something like that. So let's look at the agenda. This is Group 2, the third meeting of Group 2. There was a little typo, talked about Group 3, but this is Group 2, third meeting. So the rules that we are contemplating in Group 2 are listed 1 through 11. So we're going to do welcome and introductions here in a second. The meeting scope is to really look at these at least this time, maybe an additional time. We'll talk about that in a minute, to review the drafts that have been proposed and something that CAB was asked to put together, and they did, as far as the last two regulations, number 10 and number 11 on the agenda. And we'll have public comments if anybody from the public wants to comment. And then the possible fourth group meeting, October the 26th at 9 a.m. My goal is maybe a little ambitious, but I would hope that we could get to as close to consensus as we could today. We would have to have the fourth meeting if we have to have it. I think would probably be only around those last two rules, Rule 10 and 11, if we can't, fight through some of that and get as close to consensus as we can. So with that, I always make this announcement that this is a recorded meeting, put on our website hopefully within a week or so, so all the rest of the people that are interested as stakeholders and or the board can listen to this meeting. So based on that, I always ask for professional courtesy. Try not to interrupt anybody who is talking in midstream, those kinds of things. And these are very sensitive recordings that pick up about everything. So if you have a side conversation, it may be on the recording, just so you know that. With that, let's go around the table for the audio record and introduce ourselves. Let's work to my left. This is Bruce Suloff. I'm the Director of the Auto Industry Division and Executive Secretary to the Motor Vehicle Dealer Board.
Chris Rouse, Colorado Department of Revenue Auto Industry Division.
Frank Agos, Auto Industry Division.
John Opeka, I'm with the Auto Industry Division.
Corey Amen, Deputy Senior Director of Enforcement.
Criddell-Tapanen, Meeting Recorder.
Michael Domermuth on behalf of the Colorado Automobile Dealers Association.
Matthew Groves, Colorado Automobile Dealers Association.
Todd O'Connell, CEO, Colorado Independent Automobile Dealers Association.
Gloria Breeden, Auto Industry Division.
Leland Beebe, Legal Assistant, Auto Industry Division.
Bradford Jones, Assistant Attorney General, General Counsel to the division and the board.
Okay, thank you, everybody. So let's just dive into this. I'm sort of going to turn this over to Leland. We're going to talk about rule or items number 1 through 8 specifically as we go through this. I think that 1 through 8, I do believe that when we left our last meeting, there were some suggested changes that we are very near consensus on how those rules need to appear for uploading to the Secretary of State and eventually to the Motor Vehicle Dealer Board to have a public hearing. I made this announcement during the board meeting. What our goal here is, and I think it is a very achievable goal, is that even if we have to have the fourth meeting on the 24th, or is it the 26th? I'm sorry, the 26th. If we have to have that fourth meeting, I think that we will be able to then draft these rules and upload them onto the Secretary of State's office, and then the formal rulemaking process is kicked off. In the formal rulemaking process, then there's a timetable of when you can have the public hearing. And based upon what staff and Leland and I as staff have looked at, is if those rules are uploaded several days after the 26th, maybe the 29th or 30th, then we will be able to have the public meeting on December the 6th, which is a Wednesday. And I asked the board today to reserve that date. That could be a fairly lengthy meeting because we would be looking at 13 rules. It looks like 13 rules in that public hearing. So with that, I'm kind of going to turn this over to Leland, and he's going to go through these, and obviously we need to have comment on these rules as he has sort of drafted them, and I like the way that he has put these together as far as what the current rule is, what sort of a red line would look like, and then what the final rule would look like if that's what we decide to move forward. So I'll leave it.
Yeah, just a comment on what Bruce just commented on, which is that the format of presentation and what you received was an attempt to show the transition as it would occur and as it would be at the end. One of the hardest things in working with red line versions, as any of you that do this for a living or regularly know, is that it's real hard to figure out just what's there and what's not until you see the way it looks at the end. So that was the goal here. Several of these did not have changes. The first of them is Rule 126104, Parent 3, Parent E, and it was the working group's determination at the last meeting that this did not require any changes. If that's still the working group's opinion, then we would be prepared to move on, and that would mean that this rule would not be put into a rulemaking with the Secretary of State's office because it doesn't need to because it's there. But it would mean that the board, at one of its upcoming meetings, would see this rule and be asked to say, yes, it's okay to pass this through without change. And there would have to be some sort of notice of that kind, and that would allow this rule to be counted as part of the board's success in the completion of its regulatory agenda for this year. Okay, just so you all understand, that's why under the governor's office order and everything else, we have to give some kind of account to every being that we look at, and that'd be the count. Is there anyone who thinks now that this particular rule would require any revision? Okay. We'll pass on that and move forward. The next one is the mirror of that in the power sports industry. Okay, and this is the regulation 126504, parent 1, parent E, parent capital letter 1, or I'm sorry, Roman numeral 1. Identical rule. Is there any basis for us to do anything different with this rule?
Now, this one would have to be noticed because it's a proposed rule.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. I'm very sorry. The content is the same. This one will be noticed. Yes. By the way, Jerry Abud is not able to be with us today because he's hospitalized. He has looked all of this over. I don't have his authority to speak for him, but Jerry is one who never ceases to say his disagreement. He didn't voice any to this at this point, okay? Michael, you're... Okay, so that will be moved forward unless there's an objection with identical language to the prior rule that we just discussed. Okay, the next one. This is one of the delegation rules, and it's 126105, parent 1, parent B. And in this circumstance, I need to make a comment. Whenever we open a rule for any purpose, then we will be expected to do the best job we can to conform to the statutory conventions that are in place now. In other words, the way many of our rules were written, some of them were written as far back as the late 40s, early 50s. They contain extraordinarily antiquated language, legally speaking. They do not conform at all to plain English, for example. Almost none of them conform to basics of current grammar usage and legislation, which would be a active versus passive voice construction. So if we open a rule, then we need to conform it as best we can to the standards in play today. So that's part of what I've done here. There were definite changes here in this structure to eliminate passive voice and to simplify expression. And the new material that was added was in paragraph number 1, and that was to address concerns that CADA through Mr. Donovan had raised concerning, the ability to approach the board and have some assurance that something could be agended at some point relatively easily. And so that's why that change in language is there. And then otherwise, it is a simplified and activated as far as active voice version. And now we need to know if there's some comments on this.
Fundamental question. Is the executive secretary always the executive director of the auto industry division by statute?
No.
No.
So those are two separate positions, obviously. Now.
No, it's the
Now
same. It's the same, but
Now the division is statutorily created, okay, and the director's position is statutorily created. The current law still contemplates that an executive secretary is appointed by the executive director of the Department of Revenue after consultation with the board.
okay. So the board can make a recommendation to the executive director of the Department of Revenue for whoever they want in that executive secretary position.
They can make a recommendation, but clearly it's the executive director's final authority that puts that position in. So if you probably don't remember, this is well before my time too, well before my time, but they were two separate positions for a number of years. There was, my understanding, there was some issues with who's accountable to who supervises who. There was a certain amount, I don't think that was in a big deal, but there was a certain amount of animosity between the director and the executive secretary at that point in time about things happening at the board level and the director level and so on and so forth. So, and for an ease of probably budgetary status, they were combined some years ago into the same position and have been that way for a number of years. So,
Yeah, it's been that way for as long as I can remember. I was just wondering if it was automatic or how that happened. The substantive change in Roman numeral 1 was well done, Leland. Thank you. That was exactly what I was getting at, I think, in our first session on this, and I think that addresses my concern there, and I appreciate the addition of that language.
I guess we need to make sure that everyone agrees with the addition of that language, since it's now visible.
Well, I certainly am okay with that. I think the comments that you made, I took seriously about that issue and agreed that to do something, and Leland has put it in language that I personally think I'm comfortable with, it's kind of expanding the ability for the public to make strong recommendations on board agenda items.
Does that work for you, Todd?
Yes.
So we're okay with it as is now? All right. So this brings us to the next one. Again, it's the Executive Secretary's delegated authority. This time it's in the Power Sports 12-6-504, Parent 1, Parent B. All of the changes that were in the Motor V side have now been implemented in this as well. Is
Oh,
there
I'm
any-
sorry, you jumped ahead to the power sports?
Yes.
What about paren 2 and paren 3? There's some wording changes, is that modernization of language?
It's modern, yes, it is.
Are you all okay with the modernization of language? I don't think it changes any content, does it? Okay with the modernization of language, okay? And then paren 3, I just wanted to point out that my goal there was to have the ability to do fact-finding for all applications, not just salespeople. I mean, in technicality, that's been the practice since I've been here, but that's not exactly what the rule said. So it's just really bringing the rule into what the practicality of what has been done.
And that's what the group agreed last week, or last couple weeks ago. Okay, so then we can legitimately go to the next one, which is that Power Sports mirror version, which is literally a mirror. Any issue? Get this right, we can go on to it. All right. All right, the next one is another of the rules that in the last meeting, the working group did not feel needed to be changed. And this is regulation 12-6-104, parent 3, parent I. And obviously this is one of the places where principal place of business is a part of the rule, and it's to do with signage. Does anyone see a basis now, having thought about it any further, to make any changes to this rule? Did you guys have a, oh, okay. All right. So
This is one that there has been some concern over the course of time as we move forward in different types of business models, practices, where dealerships are opening up, certainly more on the used car side in real small locations, business parks, those kinds of things, where sometimes their lease doesn't allow traditional signage that's visible where all other dealerships do that. The Division really looked at this hard and long, trying to figure out, is there a need for modification at this point in time? We don't think there is, but the dealer community, I guess I would ask is, do you expect when we go to public hearing that well, if there's no change, it wouldn't go to public hearing at this point in time, but is somebody going to come forward and say, wait a minute, this is no longer workable? And the problem, if it's no longer workable, is what is workable, and I think that's the whole issue, you know.
Well, there are dealerships that I've visited that do not have any major avenue of traffic. They can see the sign and they've been approved, so I don't know if it slipped under the radar, but there's a fair amount of them out there that probably don't comply to the letter of this, depending on what your interpretation of. For an example, a strip retail spot where the built in a U Well, the east and west sides don't face the major thoroughfare.
And Todd, certainly could have some slip through the cracks, obviously, they could have done that, but we actually, on a new application, we actually, that's one of the things we always look at, is signage. I mean, they're, as part of the new application, they must supply us with pictures of the signage and so on and so forth, so have they?
So I guess in that, if that's gonna be the strict interpretation of this, I would raise an objection or a question on the independent dealer side. I'm sure it wouldn't affect franchise dealers, at least currently, but there certainly is the potential where a valid location is not visible necessarily from a major, what definition of that is, avenue of traffic.
And I can tell you from the enforcement side of it, we don't get complaints about what you've said. I mean, people, they have a sign there, people know that they're a dealership, they know they're on the back side of the U and it doesn't face the street, but we don't get complaints from the public about that sort of thing. But I do understand what you're saying.
So, I mean, is now the time to address?
Well, it may be the time to address it, but the real issue is that this was put into regulation a long time ago for all the right reasons, and
Well, those reasons were.
if this is no longer, what is the option here? This is a consumer issue. Consumer needs to know that that's a car dealership there, and there has to be signage. So what's the alternative if we just totally turn a blind eye or get rid of this regulation totally?
Well, I believe that there's no issue in identifying that it's a dealership. I think the question is, do you have to go into the parking lot or actually even into the building to see the 6-inch signage on the door?
You know, we get pictures all the time of signs on the marquee and the business on the other side of the parking lot.
Well, but some buildings will not allow any marquee space.
Right.
I mean, there are some dealerships in buildings that have no exterior signage whatsoever. It's only once you enter the building and it's on the door.
Then they send us a picture of the signs in the window. Yeah, we get those quite a bit.
But that window probably isn't visible from the major thoroughfare.
It's usually visible from some street. You may not be the main street.
I don't know if usually, since we're talking about this, is.
Well, then you've got some dealers out there sending me long pictures talking.
So, Todd,
They may or may not be members of CIA.
so Todd, obviously they had to put some sort of benchmark that, you have to see it from the avenue of traffic. Is that the only thing about this that you think is problematic for some of the used car dealers, is that it has to be visible from the rest of it's fine?
Yeah,
So maybe we should look at a different benchmark or talk about maybe a different, does it even need to be there at all, that line or that portion of the line from the major avenue of traffic?
Right.
So clearly visible, I guess you would have to say from where? Clearly visible, just clearly visible? Is that sufficient? I'm looking at the attorney folks in the room. Is just clearly visible going to be, because that seems so open to interpretations that could be kind of wild. I couldn't see it from 14 blocks away, so therefore it wasn't clearly visible.
This isn't an issue for the new car dealers, obviously, as Todd pointed out. I found the division to be very flexible. I had a client last year or the year before last that was going into a mall, and the mall was very restrictive on what kind of signage they could put outside. I think we were able to convince them to put something out there, and I think that dealer, none of this was a used dealer that I represent, that ultimately went in to the mall to display product. And so I think they did ultimately get some signage that was visible from the exterior of the mall, but I can't recall for sure what happened there. I was just looking at the statute on it, to see if this departs from the statute at all. Maybe the Attorney General can answer that question. Does this really add anything that's not in the statute?
Not for I'm reviewing it right now.
I guess as a major avenue of traffic, is there a definition of that any place?
Well,
Does
yeah.
it have to be Colfax, or can J Street be a major, I would consider personally, J Street or,
When dealers call in and ask that, we just have, it needs to be visible from the street.
right? No, I'm not,
No.
I've not heard one issue from the enforcement side of this, but since we're looking at it, is now a time to,
And it really is the dealers that are going into office buildings that have the problem. Because their signage is inside.
So would this regulation still be enforceable and still be understandable to the regulated community if the words to the major avenue of traffic wasn't there? Or does that just make it even more murky because clearly visible to who from where becomes the issue?
Yeah, I mean, it's.
You know, I think that taking that out kind of leaves no benchmark, for.
Yeah, and my understanding is based on the previous stakeholder meetings is that the interpretation, at least as I understood it, is that everybody was assuming it was just any type of street that was right beside the dealership. Because again, it's for the consumers, in the statute, says for the person doing business with such dealer to identify such dealer properly. That's it. That's the goal of the statute, and that's the requirement of the statute. And then the goal of this regulation is to kind of go a little bit further than that.
well, if the statute is just to identify that it's a dealership in Suite A of this office building, that certainly doesn't require the addition of a major avenue of traffic because it certainly isn't.
Maybe it's easier to address it within the context of the consumer, and something that might say clearly visible to a consumer in the vicinity, or something like that. I mean, I'm not sure that's exactly the language, but something that gets to the question of, or reasonably visible to a consumer, even
What about
that,
clearly identifiable to a consumer?
something like that.
Yeah, the concern that I have is when I send my investigator to that dealer, can they find it? I mean, that's the bottom line. I mean, from the consumer, if they're looking for the dealer, can they find it?
Yeah.
And when you just say clearly visible, yeah, it's clearly visible above my desk and to the 32nd floor of the Republic Plaza building.
It's in my mom's basement.
Right, I mean, that's, it needs to be enforceable from our end so that we can find the place
So
we're
what,
looking for.
just playing devil's advocate then, I mean, so there's a dealership inside an office building, how do you enforce that? Because it certainly isn't gonna be able to be found by driving by and other than looking at the address of the office building.
Well, they're required to have something on the marquee or something outside, so driving by.
Then I would say in this day and age, when you don't need to have a high traffic area, that would inhibit potentially an independent dealer from doing a fantastic business, being open the required hours, having the parking spots, but not requiring visibility from a major street.
I mean, I think all businesses want to be seen, want to be found, et cetera, but when we're talking about a regulation, we do have to have that benchmark. We have to have some sort of, otherwise it is a sign in my parents' basement that you can only see from,
And we do get the signs that come in that are just the two little metal poles that's sticking in the ground,
like mile high aeration puts in your yard. Okay.
Well, we've seen it all.
Because they don't have a marquee out front and their marquee's inside the building, but they'll let them put that out in the grass by the street area. So they're finding workarounds. They're providing signage to us right now.
I'm not arguing that point. I'm arguing that there's a several buildings that I'm aware of that there's dealerships in, and there's absolutely no way that you're gonna know there's a dealer inside that building unless you walk in and go to their suite and you see the number on their entrance door or the window into the corridor. And there's absolutely no way that you could put a marquee sign there or a wire into the ground that would resemble anything.
I can probably think of a couple of those locations myself.
And the issue, I guess, I would have, if you, going back to Chris's benchmark, if there is nothing, then what are the unintended consequences of having nothing for dealerships to?
Nothing as far as being visible from the street.
From visible from the
From
exterior,
somewhere.
from the exterior of the building. What is the unintended consequences? Then do you have it in your mom's basement? Do you do that? If they're zoned, I mean, it seems like it's that's an outlandish example, but if it's zoned to where you can have that, what does it require, one parking space out from the, and it's in your mom's basement, is that, if we don't have any benchmark, are we opening up the door for those kinds of businesses to do that? The answer to that question is yes, but then the other answer is, what are the consequences?
Well, it currently can't be a residence, so, I mean, we were in jest when we said mom's basement, but John's, I think, the one that's at the 32nd floor of the Republic Plaza building, that how the heck would you know? Yeah, so.
And how do you know when they leave?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what I find interesting when I look at the perspective here, this is consumer protection. Okay, if I am going to a new doctor, I don't expect to see a sign outside for, the cardiologist. I do expect that I'm going to go into a building where the address is that I have on, and that I'll have to look at a directory. So, I mean, forever there's been, something unique about the way this is structured versus the way other types of entities that are licensed in the state of Colorado would be expected to be structured. I just guess I have to ask sort of the big question, which is, how could we put this in terms that are modern and comprehensive? Yes, it could be visible from the street. Yes, it could be visible on a directory inside of a building. It has to have some form of visibility. I guess that would be, yeah.
And to be fair, it needs to be understandable to the industry. I mean, just saying it's
Right.
visible doesn't help somebody who's trying to start a dealership.
Right.
And at the end of the day, it needs to have some value to somebody who, give some guidance to somebody who's trying to start their dealer.
And if it's on the marquee inside the building, do we fall under the 6 inches?
Right. That's, again, antiquated.
Well, and the reverse of that, obviously, because the franchise dealers, this does not play into their world in any way, shape, or form with the requirements of the manufacturer. We all know that we are moving into, at light speed, a total different type of industry because of the virtual reality of the internet and all of those. So are we going to eventually have dealerships that, and I'm telling you, the answer to this question is yes, it's not within statute or regulation now, but we're going to have virtual reality dealerships. It's just, and we're not going to have brick and mortar, traditional brick and mortars. The franchise dealers will always be there that way, but a lot of other people will not have the traditional things. So are we at a crossroads where we have to think about that? Right this second, I don't necessarily want to, but we may actually be there to where we strike this entire regulation.
15 years ago, if you did not have a 6-inch sign visible from a major thoroughfare, you wouldn't have had to worry about if they were there or not, because they wouldn't have been after a couple of weeks, because nobody would have been able to see them. But that isn't the case now. There's independent dealers that are selling a lot of cars with absolutely zero walk-in traffic from visible 6-inch sign.
Well, currently, they're required to have a brick and mortar.
Well, they have.
So right now, our reality right now with this regulation, I guess, would be to say, what kind of signs do we expect?
And where?
Yeah, and where? I mean,
Well, it's also starting to blur the lines between a wholesaler and a used dealer too.
right.
And Todd, just, it doesn't happen a lot of times, but every now and then we get an application and we get into this thing and they, or probably before we get the application, when staff is talking to potential dealers, this issue comes up and they can't make their lease work, so they look for a different location where they can do a lease where they can comply with the traditional brick and mortar and everything else associated with that. So once in a while that happens too. But how are we going to regulate the 16th floor of the Republic Plaza on a signage issue? I mean, how are we going to regulate that? I don't know.
So my question would be, currently there's dealers without visibility to a major thoroughfare, so how are those regulated any different than looking at the address, driving into either the warehouse complex where they're located in the back row, or walking into a X-story office building and going to their suite number?
Well, Todd, I gotta tell you that I think that could there have been a very few that slipped through the cracks? And answer that question is of course. But I will tell you, the licensing team, the background team really do look at this. So if there's a lot of places out there that the signage is not visible from the, is either not there or not visible from a major street, then they have misled us on their application.
Yeah, they provided us with something.
Because that's a requirement, that's an absolute requirement. Those pictures are, they send pictures and they're looked at every single time. So, I don't know.
So, Mr. Beebe, what is, I'm not an attorney, so what is the legal commerce side of it is if you are renting a space in the same warehouse complex and one building faces the front, and this is the amount of rent I can afford, but the only space that is available faces the back without any visibility.
I wouldn't hazard that. I would say that I wouldn't want to see a lawsuit or any challenge come in on the basis of we have to have a sign up when we can't get a sign up, and it's on that exact kind of location where we can't afford anything else. I mean, it's kind of like suddenly this becomes more important than all the other factors establishing a dealership. If that situation were to develop, if they had everything else that they needed and suddenly they didn't have a sign in the right spot. We wouldn't let it happen,
No,
but
we see signs that are stuck in the ground, we see signs that are wired to a chain link fence, painted on the side of a building or on a marquee, you know, at the other end of the block because it's a long thing. They're getting signs out there, they're showing us signs. We don't say it has to face Colfax or a 4-lane road or anything like that. It could be just a little dirt road almost, but if there's a sign on the fence, we call it good.
And believe me, I'm not disagreeing with anything the division is doing licensing on these, but a dirt road, I don't know, would meet my threshold of a major avenue of traffic. That's my contention.
If that's the road that people are using to get to them, we're counting it as.
No, I know you
All
are,
right,
but is that the definition?
What would you say? Do you want to just say faces a road? Because I think if you take that off, we're going to run into the, if you come into my office, you'll see the sign above my desk.
And you get into Springfield and the dirt road probably is the major thoroughfare.
Yeah.
Would something as simple as from public view, that way you get away from the office or from the something over your grandma's door that the public would not see.
Yeah. Better. Well, I'm
Would
perfectly
that
willing.
sit better for you? Public view?
Is it acceptable if there's not language right now to let me find some better experts in this than me as far as word crafting goes and submit something ASAP to not require another? Because I don't see this as I guess you could drag it on to be a huge, huge issue, but that's not what I'm trying to do here.
Is your issue, Todd, the major avenue? Is that that major avenue? Is that the stumbling block?
I think the stumbling block is with the future of the marketing aspect of being able to market the vehicles without having a high visibility location. And as tight as some of the retail space is nowadays, it's always a cycle. I mean, we have dealers coming in, prospective dealers all the time, asking us if we know about space and where they can go look for it, because it's tough, and especially if you want to stay within a close geographical area to your home or a specific location, it can be pretty tough to meet this requirement. It's not tough necessarily to be able to be in complete compliance, be able to be found if necessary.
Which goes back to my original question, if you just have clearly visible or clearly visible to the public or something, is that enough? Or does that just make it murkier? Clearly visible to who, from where, blah, 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 blah. Because if Todd's dealerships may have a problem with the major avenue of traffic portion of it, if we took that out of there, are we gonna do more harm than good? I guess is my question.
What about just visible to an avenue of traffic? I can see it from my car, it's visible.
But you can't.
And that's ultimately a philosophical question, is that where we want to go, where you can't see it from your car? We want to be able to where the general public doesn't know that there's a dealer in a building.
I don't think since this rule has been in existence that we have had to face DORA and a restraint of trade question. I think when we open it, if it clearly looks like there's a change in our procedure or policy on what constitutes trade in this business world, and it's more restrictive looking, then it's going to be a problem. If it's less restrictive looking, probably not.
I think we would be looking at the less restrictive
Yeah,
for
exactly.
the major avenue of traffic, some wording less restrictive than a major avenue of traffic.
Or a commercial public,
Right.
so that you do away with any potential residents.
I still
Commercial
think
use building.
the concern I would still have is, instead of having it on the public marquee, I've got it taped onto the front door of my office suite on the 32nd floor. And again, ultimately, if it's so consumers can find the place, I understand it's an internet world and everybody's doing that, but it's still a matter of, it still needs to be so people can find it. And you still have to have your car parked there somewhere, because the statute still requires that you have a parking spot. And we can't get around that by regulation. Statute requires that.
Oh, and that isn't the intent or the desired outcome.
Why do we care if the consumer can find it?
Well,
Why
let's,
do we care?
well, look at it from the nefarious dealer, the guy who's getting on Craigslist, selling the car, and then trying to hide from the consumer when there's problems.
And
Ultimately,
those aren't dealers.
no, there are dealers that do that.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's what we need to look at it, is the guy who really his business model is going to try to cause problems with the consumer and then hide from them afterwards. I mean, there are those guys out there.
Or if I'm serving process, I need to find.
Yeah.
find
I
it,
agree.
right?
So-
I agree. Valid.
And the statute again says signage or devices that enable a person doing business with such dealer to identify such dealer properly. So
Or
that's why-
devices.
Yeah.
Well, and the statute's also got the size and shape of such devices, right? So that's where the 6-inch
Yeah.
letters.
Well, that's why the
visible,
rule
yeah.
was promulgated.
Yep.
I'm willing to try to do something to alter this in the way that this group is discussing. It will not mean we're done with the rulemaking today on this one, if we do that. It will mean that it's got to go forward for a second review outside.
Well, I'm gonna disagree with you on that. Ultimately, this stakeholder groups in this state are brought together to see if there can be consensus.
You're right.
If there's not consensus, the agency still notices the rule, and then it's ultimately up to the agency that promulgates the rule to decide whether or not that is. I guarantee you, we're never gonna get to consensus on everything. We're charged with noticing a rule. So I get everything that Todd's saying, and I do not disagree with the major avenue of traffic, if that's the issue. I think that is an issue right now in 2007, major avenue of traffic. I think we need to find a way to lessen that a little bit in some way, but I just don't know exactly how to do that. Normal course of egress and ingress and egress, I don't know. Viewable to the public, viewable to the external, someplace on the external part of the established building, or the principal place of building something on the exterior. But come on, I mean, you Google everything when you go find someplace, okay? But I do think there has to be some signage attached. How we do that, I don't know. I would be opposed not to just do away with this, but I wouldn't be opposed to trying to figure out a way that the major avenue of traffic can change that.
CIADA's position certainly is not to do away with something that will enable the very small percentage of licensed dealers to nefariously run deceptive operation.
I think when we get to the virtual reality, when we really get to that, there's going to have to be statutory change around that. And when the statute changes, then obviously this regulation can go away. But the statute clearly contemplates signage, and clearly contemplates consumers seeing that someplace. So that's the reason for this rule. But if you're saying the major avenue of traffic is a problem, but I agree with you on that. I totally do. I think we can figure out a way to lessen that.
This hasn't been a major issue, but since we were doing rulemaking, but if it clobbers up the whole works and it becomes an issue later, I'm not saying that we couldn't address it then if now isn't an appropriate time.
What would you say if it was clearly visible from the exterior of the dealer's building or the public entry area of the building?
That would cover the marquee portion of the program when it's in an office building, like the marquee's inside the lobby.
Yeah.
No, that certainly would be better than the major street
Like in a major thoroughfare.
or any.
Kipling and the Colfax, which is the major thoroughfare.
Maybe small bites.
Yeah.
Take a small bite at this and see if it works.
And once again, I'm not worried about the current
No, I understand.
scenario.
I understand. I totally get where you're coming from, because I'm maybe not exactly where you're at, but I'm not far from where you're at on that. Less rule, less regulation in 2014 moving forward seems to be the way of the world right now. So if we can still accomplish sort of a goal of consumers seeing something and find a way to lessen that, I think we're better off.
So Brad, could you read the language one more time? Because I think I liked it, but I want to hear it one more time, sorry.
So clearly visible from the exterior of the dealer's building or the public entry area to the building.
What do you guys think from the enforcement perspective? That covers the marquees, it also covers the, standalone buildings that you gotta have something on the,
Directory.
yeah.
Not to get any deeper in the weeds, but does a 6-inch wording need to be, I mean, because it's not going to be on the marquee or the building directory, it's probably not going to be 6 inches, but it certainly can be on their suite or their window.
That was statute though, wasn't it?
Yeah.
The 6 inches?
It doesn't say 6 inches in the statute. It says to determine the size and shape of such signs or devices.
The regulation was giving that size and shape portion.
For outside signs.
So the 6 inches could be restricted to the exterior of the building portion of this.
Exterior or suite.
Yeah.
Oh, now Todd, you just went from the entryway up to the 32nd floor.
Well, it's both.
Why not? Yeah, right, okay.
I would like to see us look at something other than the 6-inch thing, some kind of other language that allows, because we've had this issue before, on a marquee out in front of a business park, everybody else's lettering is 4 inches, and it's clearly readable, clearly, but this regulation requires 6 inches. So should we figure out a way to take away the inches from, and reword it that it is, standard to the other signage in the area that is readable to the public, and just throwing out words, and it doesn't need to be massaged, but we have had that happen before.
Right.
We've had to have a marquee, a nice marquee, really nice marquee, where the letters for everybody else are 4 inches, and they are very readable. And we, have this regulation which says 6, so I think we need to look at some modification there too.
I think if we went back to that clearly visible, it's one of those that if I can find it, it's clearly visible.
Right.
I agree.
If I gotta have the guy who runs the dealership come out and point to it, maybe it's not so much.
So would everybody be okay if we just take this on and look at modifying the 6 inch and getting rid of it and clearly visible with some kind of a language that the AG has come up with? Are you okay with that?
Absolutely.
Mr. Donnermuth, Mr. Rose, are you okay with that? I know it doesn't affect your true customers.
Our manufacturers all require specific signage.
Okay? So I think we can work with Brad on that.
Sure.
We would like to see the final product, but yeah, that's fine. You're not going to hear any complaints from the new motor vehicle dealers.
Then we proceed with the same change to the power sports regulation.
And I think the point that I've been listening to everybody is the consuming public needs to know they're dealing with a licensed motor vehicle dealer in some way, shape, or form. And there has to be some visibility aspect of it to accomplish that. And obviously, building types, zoning restrictions, all of that come into play. So I think the rule needs to be faithful to the statutory purpose, but flexible enough to accommodate the future.
So how about if we do this, how about if we work on that language in the next few days, and we there may be more here, but we blast email that out and ask for written comments on that.
Close business today?
You're right on it.
Sure, Mike.
I'll do it right now.
As long as you're going to give me feedback by closing it.
I was only kidding.
I think we can do something, make it better.
Are we,
And what was the name of those dealers you go to?
Yeah.
are we ready to proceed, or are we taking a break, Bruce, or what are we doing?
Does everybody want to forge it? I'd like to take let's do these next two, and then if we need to take a break.
The next one, 12-6-115, parent 6. Okay, because we intended to open this rule, this is one of the most antiquated of all the rules in our set of rules. And so I did a major cleanup here, which meant that I basically struck the entire rule as is, and I've eliminated all the legalese, like wherein, said, thereof, etc. I've eliminated long conditional phrases, for example, in any case herein or wherein. Simplified the wording to be in plain English, and implemented the one change that meant we opened the rule, which was to move from 2 to 4 days in response time for the executive secretary if served process. I believe this is a faithful rendering of the content of the prior rule in modern language. Is there any comment?
And we have never had an issue with the current rule. I think Mr. Donovan brought up 2 days versus the 4 days, giving us a little more time. Any questions, concerns?
And then the mirror changes in the next one, 12-6-517 parent 6. It's the identical rule to what we just looked at, and I mirrored all the changes. So I'm assuming that that is also okay. Which brings us to ANSI requirements. Okay. There are several things that I did here. I clarified the language in general where it was needed. I used Jeff Seaman's concept of creating an evergreen formulation so that it would allow for historical and future versions of the standard to be implemented appropriately. I added language to ensure that the standard that would be applied in any circumstance would reflect the standard of the model year of the vehicle, regardless whether that would be a new sale or a used sale of a vehicle. And because of our discussion last week, I did not incorporate Jeff's recommendations for standards regarding some motorcycles, even though there are truly off-road motorcycles, because those are outside the current statutory scope of the statute that we're looking at as the parent for this ANSI requirement rule. So there you have it. Does anybody see any reason to object to this? Or to recommend a change?
You okay with this as of now? And I know you guys are going in a different direction statutorily. If that happens, then this rule would have to be changed at that point in time.
Anyone else want to chime in? Okay.
So obviously, leaving this regulation would only live in the power sports side of things, obviously.
Correct. Yeah. And it would not apply to motor vehicles, not apply to any motorcycle.
Because currently, a motorcycle is a motor vehicle,
Yeah.
not a power sports vehicle.
Right.
Current definition.
Right.
Anything on that? Hearing none, that looks okay. Leland, I'm thinking about something you said, and I think you're correct, but I'm trying to think about the timing. So we have 3 or 4 rules here that the group believes that no modification is needed. And I totally agree with you that at some point in time, the board has to hear about that and hear that this group is making a recommendation for no change to those particular regulations. We have a timing issue, though. And the timing issue is this: if we, so the next meeting of the motor vehicle dealer board is November, whatever that date is.
19th,
Let's just say it's
21st.
19th, whatever day that is. That is after these rules would be noticed.
Correct.
So if the motor vehicle dealer board, for whatever reason, said, well, wait a minute here, we want to open this rule, they would not be in this, group because all the rest of the rules have already been noticed, the ones for proposed change. So what does that do to, and I'm not expecting the board to do this, but it's not my decision, it's the board's decision. So if the board says we do want to review this particular rule or open this rule up, that this group says probably the recommendation doesn't meet, where does that put us in the regulatory agenda?
It puts us into next year's regulatory agenda
I think that's exactly what would happen.
with those rules.
With those rules. So everybody, that's exactly what I'm thinking too, so everybody understand that if on the 19th we tell the board these 4 rules, the group said no changes needed, and if they say, wait a minute, we want to do this, that goes into next year's rulemaking agenda, which we would have to put, well, and we can modify that. So that means that rule would not be, the possibility that rule would not be opened until after the legislative session is over with in May.
Well, I have a philosophical question, I guess, on the whole process. So if the stakeholder group recommends that there's no changes, I understand taking it to the board, but if the board also agrees, does that not give the public an opportunity? You know, just because you're not part of the stakeholder meeting, if there was a hearing, anybody would have a chance to come in and speak. Citizens, other folks. Are we denying somebody that opportunity in that process?
So what you're maybe suggesting is that we notice the rule with no changes?
Mm-hmm.
Leave them.
I mean, obviously,
Can you
there's
note-
nothing to
Yes, you
upload.
can.
Sorry, but.
We notice a rule with no changes, and then
Yeah, there's a way.
then at the public hearing, obviously, there will be a presentation by the division first about this process and what the division's stance is on that, and then everybody gets to weigh in after that, and we would just say that the stakeholders meetings didn't think that these rules were needed to be done, and then open up the public comment on each rule. If there was no public comment, then it's just moving it on.
And that would actually eliminate your step that's causing you a problem that may push that into the next thing. Not, because the board would have their chance at the same time that the public would have their chance, if it was part of the hearing process.
On December 6th.
Yeah. If the question is the way I think it is, okay, the Secretary of State's office a few years ago, I was part of a group that made the recommendation, and it has gone forward. There is a way within the Secretary of State's own publication online of rulemaking to place a comment. It's a separate section. It ends up in the Colorado Register, and it, just basically, we put a comment there that would say that the board had examined these rules, or not the board, that whatever structure we want to make to the comment. I'm not going to give you the exact language. And that would be published to the world in that way. We could simultaneously put that on the website as part of our transparency. And it would certainly meet all the requirements then of a public notice, because anything that's put on the Secretary of State's website anywhere is a public notice. So I think we could do that.
So something along the lines of, the stakeholder group met and determined that the recommendation is going to be that no changes are made. A hearing it'll still be brought before the motor vehicle dealer board on December 8th,
Right.
and you're invited to come
Right.
comment or whatever?
Yeah.
I mean, is that,
I really, truly, now that I think through that, you and I've had this conversation, we didn't get there, but now that I think through that, I think maybe that's a cleaner way to go, because we don't know what we don't know. We have put all of this, Arlene puts this out on all of these agendas and this rulemaking agenda out on our website. We don't know how many hits that is, how many people are looking at that and just waiting to see what the results are, and maybe when those results are published, the sophisticated persons, those results are uploaded, then they will decide whether to make a comment or not. We don't know that.
I mean, I'm just speaking historically, that every time we have a rulemaking, there's always somebody who they hadn't even been part of the discussion before that has shown up. I mean, I don't want to cut anybody off from the process. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to spring this on all y'all, but
No, it just sounds like a sound practice. It's not something that's contemplated in the Department of Revenue's own regulation or own policy, but that's only because no one thought about it. So,
Comments? I just think that's a cleaner way to go. Okay. I think, let us think about that, but I think that's kind of where we're at. We've been at it just a little over an hour. Let's take a break, and then we just need to jump into these off-premise permits that we have discussed quite a bit, and that CADA did some drafting of some language. So let's take a 10-minute break.
now that you say that, yeah, because I have Pepsi to make it through.
Okay, we're back after about a 10-minute break. It's 5 minutes till 3. So the next two that we're going to look at are proposed changes to Regulation 12.6.102.16, which is a definition where off-premise permits are attached. And then depending on how that discussion goes, obviously no doubt we do have a sister regulation on the power sports side, which there is not one at this point in time. So from the last meeting, after quite a bit of discussion on all the issues around off-premise permits, I asked CADA if they had the bandwidth to kind of take this project on and propose a rule based upon a lot of work that Tammy McCoy had done on this over the past couple of 3 years, and they agreed to do that. And so in front of you is their proposal, and I know that Matthew and Mike, and I don't know how much Tim waited on this, spent quite a bit of time on this. So we as a staff, just to let you know, and I did call Mr. Dahlman with on one kind of a single issue that I had with this concern, I guess I should say, not an issue, with one of the paragraphs. And so, don't know exactly how the best way to proceed is. Maybe just have, Mike and Matthew just kind of take the floor and go over what you've proposed, and we can ask questions as we go along. We can go through the whole thing, we come back for questions. How do you guys want to proceed on this? So appreciate the work. I will tell you my first blush and my second blush of reading this, I think it's in the ballpark, I do, so.
Okay. So regarding the first issue was section 1, subsection A, subsection 2. This sort of by default creates a third class that was not listed in subsection 2, so it also creates a very difficult to enforce standard by saying that no permit is necessary. You're asking the salesperson to use their discretion between selling and not selling, or somebody who is a functions expert or capability of a car that would be drawing the line between explaining what the car can do without actually pushing someone towards a sale. So I certainly understand how that would get into a gray area. I don't think we would object to striking that if that's the direction you all want to go. But then, we had talked a little bit about Tammy's work on the two-tiered, and that's in section 2. That's just limited selling and full selling. And essentially, the consummation of transaction is the hard line there. And that's easy, whether you're selling on site or you're not selling on site. 2 different classifications of permit. So something like, the auto show, where we're not actually selling vehicles there, versus some of the other tent sales that they do in different parts of the state. I've yet to attend one of those. The only other things that I think we changed, in number 4, we had mentioned adding the Greeley Stampede as one of the large events that goes beyond the 6-day period. And then we had some discussion at the second meeting with Mike's issues on inspection of records should the dealership be involved in litigation. So we included a bit there about in section 5, subsection F. Wait, is that right? No, I'm sorry. Section 6, books and records. Otherwise, I think it largely reflects what we discussed in the second meeting. But if you all have any questions.
Well, let's work backwards. Number 6, staff looked at that and we have absolutely, I think it's well written. I don't think we have anything that we would like you to consider changing. I think it's there. We're real comfortable with 6, okay? So let's jump ahead to 1. And I know we have a question. I don't know that it's a concern. It could be a concern, but a question with 126108-1A, which is new motor vehicle dealers. Correct me if I'm wrong, Chris. And we just didn't know how that played into this with used motor vehicle dealers. If there was just if we need to add the statute that has to do with used motor vehicle dealers in that same area.
I guess the confusion kind of came with the line before it said would typically require a motor vehicle salesperson license as required by 126108-1A. A is, for all intents and purposes, the franchise dealerships. B is the used car dealerships. And C is the salespeople. So didn't know if that was just a typo and maybe it should say C or
Probably.
or what, but that was kind of the question there.
Or, I mean, if you wanted to apply to both, we could just strike the letter altogether and leave it at 1081.
That would probably do it, wouldn't it? 126108-1 and just leave it there? Okay.
Gentlemen, I've got a more global challenge put to you. Okay, the structure that you're attempting to create here in paragraphs 1 and 2 relies upon defining sales activity, and that definition is falling under the rubric of the rule that we're reviewing, which is itself a definition of the principal place of business. This is a odd approach because we do have a definition of a salesperson, of what they do. If you look at in your statute books, it's now 126102 parent 20, and that's the one that is consistent with United Buying Services case concept, and it's the one that's currently applied in all ways by this division, and as far as I know, the outside world, to define a motor vehicle salesperson's activities. And what happens as a result of the structure you're proposing in this other rule is it would serve to act as a limitation on the definition as it exists for all of the statutory implementation of the whole of the Motor Vehicle Dealer Board's activities. I would think if you wanted to set up categories of exception to what a motor vehicle salesperson's activities would be, the better way would be to open 12.6, 102, paragraph 20, and set up the exceptions there. And these are the occasions when there is no sales activity. And then clean the structure up in paragraphs 1 and 2 to correspond or refer to that. Do you see where I'm headed here, gentlemen, guys?
So I don't have 102.20 in front of me. I mean, I guess philosophically at least, if we had the premise that a salesperson's license is attached to the dealership for whom they're employed, because you can't have a salesperson's license that's not attached to a dealership, then this would be sort of privileges above and beyond what is bequeathed to you by virtue of having that permit, because you're no longer at your dealer, you're going outside of the dealer, so this is something sort of special that's granted to you by virtue of the permit rather than by virtue of your license. Does that make sense?
A little, except that this is always going to involve the dealer.
Yes, that's true.
Okay, and, I don't know how we can deviate from that definition. Let me read it to you, Matt, okay? Motor vehicle salesperson means a natural person who, for a salary, commission, or compensation of any kind, is employed either directly or indirectly, regularly or occasionally, by a motor vehicle dealer or used motor vehicle dealer to sell, lease, purchase, or exchange, or to negotiate for the sale, lease, purchase, or exchange of motor vehicles. And, it looked to me like if you create exceptions under that definition, so that, like you did in your number 1A, little letter I, that's a form of activity that you're saying is not actually a sales activity.
And that's the purpose of what we're trying to do here, Leland.
Right.
And we're trying to mitigate some of the ridiculousness
Right.
of the United Buying case.
Yes.
Clearly. I mean, that case says anything anyone does in furtherance of a sale is licensed activity.
Right.
Okay? Which is a
Yeah.
ridiculous result, and I've heard the board espouse similar views. One of the board members, when this issue came up before, said, so that means my receptionist, who answers the phones and direct calls to salespeople, is acting in furtherance of the sales and requires a license.
Right.
I mean, and so this is simply trying to deflect some of the broad scope of the United Buying case.
Yes.
And I think that this is entirely appropriate here, because it does get into the off-premise permit issue of what if you just placing a car on the T-box out at Fossil Trace, and you've got somebody there for security, there is no product information, there's nothing else going on. That's just trying to establish that it's not sales activity that requires a license. So, that's my view of the world. I don't think this is inconsistent with the statutes. I think it's consistent. I think it belongs here in the off-premise permit section. This is where it makes logical sense for it to be. And I think that was Ms. McCoy's intent when she drafted this, although I shouldn't speak for her since she's living the good life in Alaska or Oregon or wherever the heck she is. I hope she listens to this too, so although I doubt it highly that she will. Anyway, so I think it does belong here, and I think it is, again, just designed to try to mitigate some of the broad scope of the United Buying case.
And so your attempt here is to put in regulation what the practice of the division has been of this kind of activity.
Absolutely.
Doesn't require a salesperson or a permit to display that vehicle on the first hole or in the mall and those kinds of things.
Or any location, right. And, and we totally agree with taking out Robinette number 2 here, the section beginning with demonstrations. we got wise counsel on that really was a slippery slope we didn't necessarily want to go down. But I think the first one of just putting a vehicle out for display and having a security person there should be outside the scope of a licensed activity. And is current, and as Mr. Zuloff pointed out, is consistent with auto industry division practice currently.
I guess I kind of understand the security part of it, but at what point does the greeting become sales? I mean, it's...
Yeah, exactly, John. I mean, you're absolutely right. That's a beautiful car, isn't it? Right?
Well,
yeah.
let me
Don't
show
hit
you-
it with your golf ball.
Well, let me open it up for you and
No.
have a seat in it, and let's
Yeah.
start talking about the options. I mean,
Yeah.
it's,
So, yeah.
And I think John raises a legitimate point that we've never went there.
No,
And we've
yeah.
and we've never really had that complaint. Wow, I'm gonna say something that every time I say this, the attorneys just laugh at me, but we've got to have some common sense in this too.
Right.
I mean, where's the common sense in the statute? And everybody laughs at it. There's no such thing as common sense in drafting a statute there. What are you talking about? But, yeah, I understand this. I do. I guess that when that display only and there's somebody there, when that person steps over the line where we are talking about the product in such a way that it is an attempt to elicit more conversation between the two, then they're over the line. But until then, you know, how do we regulate that? So, Todd, you got anything on that issue?
No, I agree.
Chris, do you have anything after they clarified 1081, just leave that as is, anything on it?
And then we're getting rid of all of the demonstration or test drives.
All of
for this,
two.
So that whole thing's going away, right? That's where most of my other concerns lie. So I'm good now.
Yes, someday we may want to tackle two, but right,
Bless you.
someday in some other way, we may want to tackle two some way, but wow, I just don't know. I mean, there's so many unintended consequences, and that one that I talked with you about is really out there, so. Based upon the discussion, the change to removing the A and removing 1 and 2, is there anybody that has any kind of further heartburn on that issue?
I just have a quick question, and it's for the attorneys in the room. Is there any danger to saying, only in this regulation, this is what sell means? Will it bleed over into something else ever, or can we feel fairly secure that selling for the purpose of just this regulation means these things? Because I don't want it to bleed anywhere else.
And I think that's a really valid concern, Chris. And I think the answer to that is, if somebody argued this in defense of an unlicensed sale, your first request would be, okay, where's your off-premise permit? And if they don't have that, then you don't get to the second question, I think. I think that's how I would interpret it.
Okay.
I could definitely see the arguments being made,
Yeah.
for sure. I see what Leland was also saying regarding putting it under motor vehicle salesperson, because OLLS, when they review this, they may have some kind of concerns associated where this regulation is placed. So just wanted to put that out there for consideration at this point. But in terms of your question about sale, yeah, I could see that argument coming up. That doesn't mean necessarily that it's a viable argument, but it would probably be something that we would have to respond to. So,
do we still need even an A in there at all? If we just have that the offering is, the display only event doesn't require a permit? Because I think A kind of goes more towards Roman numeral 2 as opposed to Roman numeral 1.
So when you're saying take out A, you would just have, you would take out the entire paragraph that says as used within this regulation all the way to accept that?
Yeah, just under, just have the Roman numeral 1 there, offering a display only event is excluded from this permit requirement.
Oh, I see. Easy enough.
It might be a little cleaner and
Yeah.
resolve some of those issues.
Well, when you place something in quotation marks, as the word offering is, you are certainly inviting, what does that mean? And I know exactly why it was placed in quotation marks. As, then, the same thing applies to, for security purposes there. If we have confidence that the plain English definition of a word like offering in this context can only have one reasonable meaning, then we wouldn't want to have quotations around it. If we start removing quotations, it makes it easier for John's idea to fly. Because what was going on in little letter A above this is that there's an attempt to confine the word sell. Now if we take that out, then it looks like it's a separate kind of consideration going on. Offering, okay, offering is a part of a sales activity, probably in anybody's plain English definition. If you wanted to make it more clear, you could say offering for sale is excluded from this requirement. That would really clean it up.
Or displaying a vehicle.
Yeah, take out
Yeah.
offering out.
And then get rid of it. Yeah, get rid of it all.
Mike and Matthew, would you have any problem with taking the word offering out, just talking about the display?
So it just read, except that a display-only event is excluded. Okay.
Mike? Okay.
I think the word offering could be problematic.
Yeah.
Sure.
Oh, I can see that.
So are we looking to get rid of all of A and then get rid of offering in the little I? Did I hear that correctly? Before I start scribbling on my
I
paper?
believe so.
Okay, thank you.
Well, yeah.
I'm not sure that I totally understand what you said. I'm not agreeing or disagreeing, I'm just not sure I understand what you said. John, so could you say that again? Get rid of all of A, little a?
Yeah, change one to say a motor vehicle dealer or used motor vehicle dealer shall obtain an off-premise permit to sell motor vehicles away from the dealer's place of business at special sales events, shows, or other organized events. A display-only event is excluded from this permit requirement.
Right.
That alleviates my concerns over the whole cell.
Does that get to where we need to do with what you said about buying service, because we're truly then just allowing dealers to display this vehicle at?
Right.
Okay.
I think so.
Okay.
United buying has always bothered me a little bit.
I get it.
Yeah.
I totally get
It's
it.
way too broad.
Furtherance of the business is pretty broad.
Okay, then the question is the next sentence there, the one that follows at a display-only event, a person may be present for security purposes or to greet customers and provide, okay, I see that adding some content and understanding, but does everybody agree with that, or is it superfluous?
Well, does display only speak for itself? Display only.
That's the question.
Well, I think what the dealerships are trying to get towards is there's a difference between just having a vehicle sitting all by itself in the middle of the shopping mall
Or if you have a person there, he's not there to sell, he's just there to greet people and provide security so nobody keys the lovely car in the middle of the parking lot, I mean the shopping mall, right?
But I think also, if somebody comes up and asks a question, even if he has the fortitude to say, I'm not really allowed to talk about sales, can he just hand out a card and say, go talk to these guys?
I personally don't have a problem with that.
With what?
With them handing a card or handing them,
Oh.
in this case, this is a 2018 Chevy Equinox, and here is a flyer on the Equinox. Here's what, the flyer, here's a flyer. Is that sales activity? Some would argue, yes, it is. Certainly under United Buying Service, you could make that statement, but come on, I mean, let's use some common sense. Is there, this is going on every single day in our industry, everywhere. And are we having consumers harmed by that issue? And in fact, we're probably enhancing the consumer. They're getting information, boom. The real key, Matthew, is what you said, is that person, it's a slippery slope for that person, and that person cannot step over that line.
And it's almost an affirmative damage if they don't, right? If they just say, oh, I can't talk about it, then you might be turning customers away at that point.
I don't mind regulating this industry in any way, shape, or form, but I don't want to over-regulate this industry. That's not what our mission is there.
That it would really have to have a person maybe present for security purposes when, as long as they're abiding by within the parameters of what a salesperson can or can't do, then that's fine. Now we're just creating more stuff here.
But I do kind of like it because I know Tammy, especially Tammy and I had several conversations about, well, if we're gonna put this vehicle in the mall, can we have a person there? As long as they don't talk about price? I mean, those are the questions that the dealerships were asking Tammy
Right.
when she was there. So maybe this provides just clarity to the regulated community, right? On whether or not they can have somebody there, so they don't have to call CADA every time.
Right.
Well, I think we would all agree that there is a point where the salesperson is trying to sell the car, and at that point, this isn't a display-only situation. I mean, when the salesperson's actually trying to sell the Golf or the car, we're beyond where this is just a display-only event. So there has to be some differentiation between the two, otherwise that big tent sale, we're just displaying the cars.
Sure.
And we're displaying the cars for what reason?
Well, I get it, but I mean, that's on the enforcement side of things, that's how we have to look at it, is how is the person who's trying to use these to their benefit, is that what they were intended for? It's the law of unintended consequences.
Yeah, I personally really like that sentence, because the security purposes are very obviously easy to define. Greeting customers, well, there's a lot of variety there. Provide general information. I like that because there's a big difference between general information and specific to the car information. And it's on the dealership and on the product. It doesn't say on the specific car. So I think it's got good language.
Well, also, let's look at it from, we are allowing right now chats outside of the business hours on Saturdays, on Sundays, we're allowing chats. And the whole issue that, and we dealt with all of that in the Internet Focus Group. There's no way for us to regulate that, nor do we. I don't know how we would ever work with. So as long as that chat does not step over that line where some type of sales activity, we're allowing that right now. We are.
Right.
And if we weren't, I could log on to any franchise dealer on Sunday and start looking at inventory, and that chat's going to pop up there.
That might be a good idea.
And I could chat with them.
And that person in Bangalore, India would want to sell you a car.
Or the computer. I mean, that's, some of those are just computer-generated responses. How do we license that?
Yeah, no, I think it's good the way.
I just think we, as a regulator, need to bend on this a little bit.
I concur.
And I'll tell you, as the guy who's probably the most recent to come into this industry from other occupations and other lives, if I'm that golfer and I see that car there, I want that person to give me a certain amount of information. I don't expect to walk off with a sale, but I expect a certain amount of information.
How much is it?
Especially if you win it.
Right.
You want to know all about it right then.
How much in it? How much taxes? How much is it? How many taxes do I owe if I hit the hole in one?
No, 0 to 60 or whatever.
Yeah.
Hey, by the way, kind of off the record here, Mr. Donald, I haven't confirmed this, but I believe former board member Jason Wagner got a hole-in-one on an event this summer in one car.
What a car.
I think
Nice.
so.
Nice. So anyway, I think we're headed in the right direction. We just need to stop trying to figure out how many angels can dance on the head of the pin.
I think on this issue, I would, we'll see what your rewrite looks like, you know, but I think we need to bid on this a little bit. Okay. All right, so you want to move to number 2, and I guess you've sort of already been through that. When staff discussed it, we had a couple of, I don't know what I call them concerns, but questions, so I'll let staff jump in.
Something really simple. I think in our staff discussion on this, we couldn't really see any principal basis not to have the words "at least" put in front of the 2 days, but we also don't think that 2 days ever belongs there, but it should all be the same days, 14. So that it would, like, an application for the permit must be made at least 14 days prior. You know, and that would work for every one of them. And then, of course, the salesperson must be licensed at least 14 days prior to the event to keep parallel structure.
Sure. So, John, does the limited selling with those matters that Leland just put out, does the limited selling, you've had more contact with the ambulance, fire, and all that, does that get them to that area? Does that get them to a limited selling event?
I believe it would.
And of course, just so everybody knows that what they want is not as high a fee.
Right.
Which we have no control over that until fee setting.
And I think that was the intent in this limited selling piece, was to try to accommodate those specialty vehicles that John mentioned, I think at meeting 1 or 2, I can't remember which it was, one of the 2.
So,
And Todd, I know you probably weren't here for those earlier discussions, so the board can only set the fees once a year.
Yep.
So this is gonna go before the fee
Right.
setting, so there won't be a structured divide until the fee is set. I mean, it's gonna be the same fee for both
This
these
sets the
types if
structure.
this regulation goes through until July at the earliest.
We had a question, guys, about what it means to have something consummated. This reflects a bunch of discussions we've had over the last decade on what the meaning of that term is in this industry. Mike, are you smiling over there?
It's a tough. Reminded of the Supreme Court justice that said I can't define it, but I know when I see it.
Yeah. Yeah.
it's a tough word.
Well, and it's used other places in our statutes and regulations, and everybody always has the question of, you know, what constitutes that. Now we're putting it in yet again, so.
Right.
It's like, it's, yeah.
And it really is critical if we're going to enforce around something, because, you know,
I think the word here should be completed instead of consummated.
Yeah.
Transactions are completed at the off-premise location. Now, this is mentioned, that word is used several times in our statute and sometimes not consistently.
Anybody else have anything on limited selling?
So the intent is just to set up a different class for a lesser fee, basically.
This one is really geared toward that group that are at shows and are not actually involved in the full selling of vehicles. They're showing these vehicles. They're definitely involved in a certain amount of sales activity, but the sale is not going to be completed at that site. They're not bringing that kind of paperwork with them. That's not done. So that certainly is what the ambulance and fire people said was really problematic for them.
Well, with us starting to bring in power sports on this, I think this will affect them as well, because they've got a couple really big shows where they're definitely displaying stuff and involved in sales-related activity, but are probably not going to get to the point where they're actually rolling the snowmobile off the lawn and selling to somebody right there.
Yeah, they're not bringing any.
If you show up to one of these and there's a purchase order or a finance agreement there, it's not to the letter of the intent. Is that,
It may not be limited then. It may be, they may have needed to have a full sell.
yeah.
Okay, so with limited selling, with this, Mike and Matthew, with this, the dealers that go to the auto show, would they be getting limited selling? Because correct me if I'm wrong, a member of the public can't walk into that show and drive out of there with a car.
Right. And, I mean, by my reading of it, they would have to have the limited selling permit.
Would that be the same for like the stock show and the state fair?
I'm new to Colorado, I've never been there before, sorry.
And I don't know the answer to that question, John. I've not visited and seen what kind of sales activity takes place at those events.
Well, there's a mix. There's some used dealers that go that actually have units that they're trying to sell, but
That
there's
you can
always
drive off.
Well, and that's really the question, because I mean, they're willing to sell you that trailer that's sitting there, but you're going to have to wait until the stock show's over before they'll let you drag it off the showroom floor.
Well, I think if they take an order and complete a sale, no matter when you drive it off, if they do the paperwork there, then they have to have a full sale permit.
Full selling.
So I think that, yeah, I mean, I've never been to the stock show to see what happens there, but if there's those kinds of transactions, I would think we would require a full sell if this goes through.
I agree.
Yeah, I think, I don't know, could that lead to, do we need to clarify digital transactions to include not having any sales paperwork available, or? I don't know how deep you need to go in the rabbit hole to do that.
Well, and the other thing is we could, as a matter of policy, we could take this limited sale and full sale and put some parameters, guidelines within the form that the board would approve, that would may have some of that issues in the guidelines. Therefore, if they wanted to change some of the guidelines, they wouldn't have to come back and do a full rulemaking again.
I mean, if you're at a limited sales event and there's a salesperson there and you say it's 10 grand, can I put a deposit on it and then go back to the office? Is that what the intent of it is?
I mean, so I lack a lot of institutional knowledge, and I clearly do not understand consummated joke. But just in very basic terms, it seems like the deal is I give you money, you give me a car. If you didn't give me a car, we haven't completed that deal.
So you just can't take delivery at those sales.
And again, that's,
Well, no, I think in John's case, if they complete all the paperwork, even though you can't pull that trailer off because it's a display model, but that's the one you bought, then that is a full sale. But if it's anything short of that, it's not a full sale. And if they take a deposit, is that a completed transaction? I don't know that it's completed because it's only a deposit. Then you get into,
The difference between a deposit and a down payment.
you get under the Consumer Protection Act.
Oh, my God.
So I think that we may be trying to overthink that a little bit.
What about execution versus non-execution of documents, sale documents? Or is that too simplistic?
I think we just stay with the word completed and then just have some guidelines of what a completed sale is.
And I kind of agree that we should probably see this in action before we try and overthink this to death. You know?
Matthew, I got
It
one.
could be perfectly fine the way it is.
I got one quick comment. You talked about a down payment. We actually had an investigator undercover go out to a franchise dealer just to see what they were doing in an undercover deal. And he walked out the door and the salesperson wanted a down payment. I don't have any money. Well, leave me your watch.
Yeah. You don't have any money to put down or to put as a deposit? Give me your watch.
True story.
It's a joke in our office now. We always tell that investigator, give me your watch.
Consummated.
If he was an investigator, it had to be a Timex.
It's not worth anything for state employees.
So I'm wearing a Timex, so I wanted you to know that.
So let's see what that, when you and Matthew redraft this, let's see what that looks like with just the word completed in there. But
Completed instead of consummated, at least 14 days on both. So yeah, I've got that. I'm not sure of any new motor vehicle dealers who want to do any limited selling. I think this is primarily drafted to get at the folks that John was talking about at the prior meeting.
And here's another question, and this is a true story. At the stock show, sandwich board with all sorts of pictures of all the inventory that they have with price tags and everything. Where would they fit in this scheme? Because it was a salesperson there that was trying to sell the inventory. I mean, is that display only? Is that?
That would be an advertisement, clearly, so it would have to comport with the advertising regs.
And if they're gonna sit down and start hammering out some paperwork, they're full selling. I don't care
Yeah.
if the product's there or not,
Right.
because they're gonna hold that customer to that. Oh,
Right.
no, you bought a trailer, my friend.
Right, no, I think that's right, I think Chris is right, as long as, and I think if it's just to give the consuming public an idea of what inventory we have and what the prices are, that poster board is no different than your internet.
Right.
So, which will have the same information on it.
I think the dealers will be interested in the difference in price. So that'll be up to the board to see how much of an incentive there is to try and have a limited selling instead of just getting the regular full selling and not worry about all the gray areas that you might be able to get into.
Right.
Mike, I've got another little question here. If you go down to your 2B, little parent, or to the III section.
Robin at 3, okay?
Yes. Where you say, but any salesperson is being licensed for an event, blah, 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 shall make application to the auto industry division in person. I doubt that we can enforce that. People can apply for every other salesperson's license, you know, by mailing this document in, or, you know, I mean, it's, so I wonder what was your intent there to?
Oh, I know what his intent was.
I know what it was.
Yeah,
It was
no secret.
It was to help us out, but I don't disagree with Leland because at some point in time, in the not too distant future, we may take all applications online. And so then. there would
How are
be-
you gonna do fingerprinting that way? I guess you can go to your local police department, get fingerprinted, and have that transmitted as part of your record.
And I hadn't noticed that before either, Leland. You do make a point, and since we were just over on the Western Slope meeting with dealers over there, they kind of always bring up that, the dealers in Denver can just run down to your office. We can't just run down to your office.
Right.
We hear that quite a bit, so, yeah.
Yeah, I know why you.
Yeah, we were trying to get rid of the out-of-state slash.
And-
Yes.
Right.
That's
Thank
what we're
you,
trying
thank
to
you
get
for
rid of.
doing that. I just don't know that,
Okay.
that we can, like Leland says, I don't know that we can actually.
So we can just eliminate the entire second sentence of Robinette 3.
Yeah.
What can we say that they have to be licensed but not on a temporary? The permanent license has to be issued.
You may get into Commerce Clause problems there, Gloria.
Until we get away from, until we eliminate the temporary. I don't know that that's.
So are we getting rid of everything after, including, but
But.
any salesperson being blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
Everything
Yeah.
after that in that?
Right.
Okay, good.
So we have 14 days to get them licensed.
Yeah.
And that will hopefully take care of some of this stuff with out-of-state salespeople coming in.
Well, we'll definitely with fingerprinting be able to get the results back in that 14-day window. And we'll be able to ascertain if somebody is a convicted felon that wouldn't be able to have a license here in Colorado.
Is 14 days enough for the salespeople?
I think so.
I do too. For this regulation.
Okay.
It expedites.
Yes,
That's what we
definitely.
would be doing. So it is a specialized consideration.
But you don't leave with the application. You
How do
don't
we know?
necessarily know that, other than the fact that they all have out-of-state addresses.
Right. That helps.
That is true.
At Folsom Prison.
I mean, it may be something as simple as adding a box to the salesperson application that says, is this for an off-premise event only? I
Right.
mean, maybe something as simple as that.
And-
I say simple, but, changing forms in Department of Revenue is not always simple, but.
Yeah.
But actually, that would help that issue.
Yeah, it would.
If
Help a
there's a
lot.
box
Would
there.
expedite those.
Then you know that
Yeah.
those go in the fast-moving file that needs to have the
I'd like to hold you
CPI.
back.
So requiring the list of now unlicensed sales individuals to show up as part of the full selling application. Would that be the idea? Mike, just
Can you repeat that?
Okay. All right. Going back to the problem, which is that 14 days, as Gloria put it, if it just comes in the door as an application, there's absolutely no way to know that this is a person associated with this event. And we don't want to put a burden on Gloria's team to make an inference for all people who have out-of-state addresses, because we have other people that have out-of-state addresses other than people that are coming for these special events. So if there's a requirement that as part of a permit, to get the permit, that you declare who these individuals that are going to be selling at that event are, as part of the permit requirement, you actually get an answer immediately on whether this random person whose application
I
came in
think that would
yesterday.
be really onerous on some of the
Right.
franchise dealers to have to list all of their, like if it's, I'm gonna use AutoNation only because
Yeah.
they're
So
huge.
big,
They
right.
gotta list the 50
Yeah,
people that they're
exactly.
gonna have at Mile High or Invesco or whatever we're calling it nowadays. They have to list those 50 people on their permit application. And what if
Only
they
if-
hire a great guy 13 days before the sale and they've already turned in their permit application 14 days before the sale? Do they have to go, oh, and we're gonna have Chris Rouse be one of the salespeople too?
So there's no way that we can prevent Gloria from just normal process.
No, there is a way. We
Put
had
the checkbox.
Put the checkbook on the checkbox on the application. Now, remember,
Ah.
folks, we
Yeah.
have to redo this application a little bit anyway
Mhm.
because of fingerprinting.
Mhm.
We're gonna have, so we're in the process of
gonna be touching it?
We're gonna be touching it because it has to be modified slightly on that issue. Should we just find a place to put a checkbox in there? Is this for a permanent license at a dealership or whatever that checkbox is, or an off-premise permit?
Or an off-premise event.
Or a premise
Mhm.
permit? I think
I
that's.
think-
No,
I think we can solve that
As
real
long
easy.
as the form is consistent with the statute and the regulation, you're gonna be okay.
It's
I've had problems.
We've never
in the
had that
past.
happen before.
Yeah. We do have some history there, don't we, Mr. Dulaw?
Okay. Okay, so, you're gonna recraft that a little bit on that.
Yes, sir.
Number 3, obvious, you know. Number 4, I think we're okay with 4. John raised an issue that I think bears a little bit of discussion. Should the, so it's not, if there's an event that's not in regulation, that happens, some new event comes along next year, and it's an event that is 10 days long, that we're not thinking about. The only way to put it in for is redraft the regulation. Is there a way to say, and I think John's was the board will decide annually on off-premise permits that are more than 6 days? Is the way that a board can do that?
You know, the problem you get into with longer than 6 is Sundays. And, you know, that's the problem you're gonna get into with any event longer than 6 days. And I know the division would really like Sunday sales.
Okay, Michael, to answer you, even if somebody applies for such a permit, we're not ratifying that they can violate the Sunday sales law.
I think if you give somebody a permit to sell for 10 consecutive days, you probably are.
Well, we're already doing it at the stock show and these other listed events.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's one of those that, why is it okay at the stock show, not at the Stampede? I mean,
Yeah.
that'll be the argument on the other side.
Well, this will make it okay at both places.
I get that,
Correct.
but I mean,
Yeah. Yeah, I understand what you're saying, Bruce.
And I don't know.
Maybe that's what Tammy was trying to get at with the A.
I think you're right.
I think the problem that we have with that consecutive thing is, okay, does that mean that I can keep getting a permit at the same location, as long as I take Sunday off, I can get those off-premise permits forever? I mean, at some point, it doesn't make sense that you're operating out of another location, get a second
Yeah.
location, not an off-premise. Though you can at somewhere like Fiddler's Green, but it's still a matter of, if you're parking cars there all the time.
When does it become a
Right.
additional location? Is that what
Yeah.
the question is?
Right.
Yeah.
Or an off-premise permit
Right.
situation. Yeah, I don't know what the answer to that concern is. And Bruce, I don't know, I think we could come up with some language to try to create some flexibility for longer events, but I'm not sure we really want to do that.
I get it.
I think there should be some people will be at the mall all summer long.
Well, yeah, I've already got a phone call about a dealer that wants to do that.
Right.
And that's where you get into is, at what point at what point is this regulation being abused?
Right.
I don't have a good answer.
Yeah, we talked initially, I think, about maybe limiting the number available, to 3 or 4 a year.
So how about if in A, just bear with me leave it as it is, A, consecutive permits for the same location are not allowed, except in the case of these special reoccurring, at the discretion of the board. We put a discretionary thing at the board there. So the board determines whether or not these special events are truly special events, or do they need, well, wait a minute here. We need to get a second verification. Mike, the discretion of the board, let the board make that decision?
Well, assuming that passes muster with the constitutional scholars in the room,
I do have concerns about how that would play
I
out.
thought you might, Brad.
I mean, starting at the basis of how often would this occur? Is this annual, or would we need to put a time limit on, at the discretion of the board? You know, would we have to, would that result in calling an emergency board meeting if we find out 14 days before?
It may, or they can just delegate it to the executive secretary, because he always makes good decisions. Look, I mean, the way they've got this constructed, consecutive permits are not allowed, except, and so, I mean, the board by statute, by regulation, and by practice, has broad discretion.
Right.
And if they step outside of that, everything's appealable. The board already has discretion on every license that's issued, every single one.
Here's an example. How about the Renaissance Festival in Larkspur? It goes on all summer long. I want to set up an off-premise permit at that for the entire run of the Renaissance Festival, which I don't even know how long it runs, 2 months. So is that the kind of event that we want to retain flexibility for, or is that the kind of event we say, no, we don't want people selling cars there?
Well, as you're saying, is that a consecutive, or they issue consecutive permits even though they're only there, since they can't be there on Sunday, they're only showing up for Saturday every,
Right.
but if they show up every
Monday to
Saturday.
Saturday, right? Yeah.
Right.
I get where you're
Well,
going.
I've got a franchise dealer that is wanting to know about this consecutive because it's a 1 month period of time, and it's someplace here in the metro area, and it is a special event, and he wants to pull 4 permits, take the Sunday off, with 4 different permits for this event. And the way, my interpretation of the current statute of regulation is he could probably do that.
But how about under this proposal?
Yeah, I mean, it would be that you can't do that except in this particular, a special event that takes place weekly for a limited period, and this is a limited period.
Right.
That he is considered, so he probably could do it under this wording too.
Well, we also have to take into account, there isn't such a thing for power sports right now. Flea market, there are booths selling the power sports. Are they going to be able to get permits for that weekends and Wednesdays, or are they not doing Wednesdays anymore? I don't even know. But those, how many times are they gonna do that all year long? Because it's year long. When does that become an additional location? When it becomes cost prohibitive, right? So if, if the price of this is structured to where it's cheaper to get these permits than it is to get an additional location, we're gonna see profits with that.
Right, you know, you're right, I didn't think about the price, because
Everything's driven by the dollars.
Or it's a place that you can't, like, the flea market's not gonna let you get your signage and everything, they're not gonna give you so you can't physically make the flea market an extra location. So then cost isn't the issue, it's the issue, that's the only way I can get in.
Well, if they're close to a major road, they could. Just kidding.
You know what I'm saying?
oh, I know exactly what you're saying. Well, let me ask you this question, is there abuse out there on this right now?
Well, right now, they don't have to have a permit, and so yes, they're out there every weekend.
Power sports, yeah.
Well, the consecutive part of it has always been a problem, because again, what is consecutive? I mean, as long as I take Sundays off, does that mean I'm not getting consecutive permits?
So is there consumer harm by the power sports being out there every, I mean, you guys get complaints or anything on that?
Oh, wait.
Does the power sports have to be mirrored to this for motor vehicle?
for the most part, we do like them to mirror.
Oh, yeah, I know.
I mean, otherwise it's crazy.
We're still, we still support the amalgamation.
Yes.
This stuff would go away if it was amalgamated, so. And actually, the power sports industry supports amalgamation too. So let's,
So I'm not sure where we're going with the changes to A, other than Bruce's suggestion at the discretion of the board, which I couldn't tell past muster with the constitutional scholar you're right.
it may not, but I would hate to say that the board doesn't have vast discretionary powers now.
I tend to agree. I mean, and that's ultimately, I think, who should be making the decision about how long these permits should be.
I don't disagree.
And the problem is, there's probably no consensus among the 9 members.
Good, all right.
Some are pro and some are against.
Permits in general.
Yeah, the off-premise permit, the whole process in general, right?
Well, let's chew on A a little bit. Let's move on to
Are you
5.
thinking out loud?
Number 5, division shall drop the form, shall include, and I think the only thing that we had, I think we agree with everything. We had some concerns with F, starting with the word additionally. The division didn't think that that needed to be there.
This gets into that whole regulatory piece we got into this year about the fact that salespeople have to be tied to a specific dealership. So if they're employed by another company, they can't be selling for a different dealer.
And that's the way it is now.
Yes, sir.
So why do we need even to say that?
No.
And then we like 6. So it's almost 4 o'clock, and I assume that
Before you leave that, Bruce, just a second. What about additionally, the dealer shall disclose if any outside salespeople are employed by another company, if outside salespeople, that sentence is gone too,
Yeah.
right? They have to be, because the
Yeah.
salespeople have to be licensed with that dealership.
Yes.
To sell for that dealership.
So everything after.
Yeah,
Everything after addition.
right. Sorry, I apologize for cutting you off.
That's okay. So today's Tuesday, right? Tuesday?
Yes.
So a little redrafting of this. When would be logical for you and Matthew to redraft?
We can get this back to you by close of business on Thursday.
Okay. So why don't we look at that, and let me think that we're okay next week if we throw this out, we look at this, and we're going to do a little bit of language modification on one of those and force it out the other way. Or no, what we'll do, we'll have yours come in, we'll look at it, we'll push it back out to this group to see what everybody thinks, and ask for written comments after that. And if their written comments come in where they're problematic, then we'll call another meeting on the
7th or 26th.
But if they are very minor changes and we can make those, is there a need for another meeting if we can get to that point? I would rather not if we can. What do you think?
That makes sense. Agreed.
So if you can have that to us, Mike, Friday morning, we can take a look at that no later than, I've got some staff gone the latter part of this week, where we look at it on Monday and push it back out. Are you okay with that?
I'd rather pursue it than that.
Well, we don't think we can.
Oh.
Because there's some staff
to, yeah. I mean, I'm sorry.
I gotta tell you, I think we are pretty close here. Anything else? Public comments? None.
Do I have some?
All right, so we're going to adjourn this meeting, and we'll leave the October 26th on the schedule, but the chances of needing that meeting are limited. Thank you all.
Thank you.